It's good to be sceptical, right? Hello, this is Zestology. I'm Tony Whiten, definitely a self-confessed skeptic. I like to be open-minded where possible, but I'm always suspicious of something before I decide that it's all right. And today's podcast is all about skepticism and why sometimes we need to get over it. This is Zestology. It's a podcast all about energy and vitality. And I suppose if you want to improve in those areas, if you want to get an extra 5% of energy or you want to feel more motivated in your life, you do have to be open-minded, don't you? So skepticism is good in small quantities. And while recording this podcast, I do come across a lot of wacky theories and themes and beliefs and thoughts. And if I believed them all, where would I be? If we're too skeptical, though, we kind of close ourselves off to potentially some of the most amazing things that we could be doing to kind of improve our energy levels. One of the things I was looking at last week on Zestology was this longevity research that shows that a small amount of exercise pretty much all the time is very, very good for longevity and makes you live longer and has less inflammation, makes you think better. And actually, it's quite obvious, isn't it? But it's the kind of thing that you have to be open-minded for. You know, sometimes you just think, well, why am I feeling like this? Surely a pill will solve it. But a little bit of open-mindedness means that, now I come out and about, record the podcasts out and about, get a bit of fresh air at the same time. And that's why this podcast is coming to you from central London, from Tanner Street Park at the moment. So Victoria Loustalot was a self-proclaimed skeptic. And then she wrote a book about it. She wrote a book about mystics, shamen, psychics, astrologers, and all sorts of these other peddlers of wacky themes. And she kind of got into it. What happened next? You can find out today on Zestology. And next time you hear a wacky theory on Zestology, you will know exactly the right approach to take. And a spoiler alert on the right approach to take. It's not skeptic, it's not woo-woo, it's somewhere in between. Remember to check out Victoria's book, which is Future Perfect, a skeptic's search for an honest mystic, available everywhere now. And here she is, Victoria Loustalot on Zestology. Looking forward to talking to you because I think I'm a bit of a skeptic as well.
There's a lot of us.
Yeah. Don't you think it's quite a good default position to be? I mean, if you just blindly believe everything that people tell you, it's not going to get you very far in life, is it?
That's absolutely true. And I do spend a portion of the book addressing scam artists and frauds. And obviously that is something that's very prevalent in this sort of the mystical industry. So I don't mean to, suggest otherwise or gloss over that. However, I think we do tend to talk in sort of very, in extremes, right? It's either, it's good to be skeptical. That's, safer. And I certainly have spent the majority of my life in that camp. Or, and then the other side is, as you said, sort of blindly believing. And I think maybe there's room for some sort of compromise in between those two extremes of being sort of cautiously open to possibility and wonder.
Yeah, that is a nice way of putting it. You're right. Actually, I haven't thought about it before, but it is safer to not believe, isn't it?
It is. Well, yes and no, right? It feels safer. Our default is, I'm protecting myself by not believing. But maybe it's not safer because of all that you could be limiting yourself to or missing out on. And that to me seems dangerous. If you think of dangerous and kind of all the amazing things that I could have experienced in my life that I didn't get to, the danger of missed opportunities, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think with skepticism also comes a little bit of nervousness or maybe even anxiety as well. I mean, I know that you spoke to shamen and mystics and psychics, and I mean, there's certainly some elements that, like for instance, I've always been very interested in ayahuasca, for example, but I'm basically pretty terrified of actually kind of, vomiting my guts up for the whole night, which is probably part of the reason I'm skeptical of it. So tell me a little bit more about what happened and why you decided to embark on this search.
Yeah, absolutely. How I went from, skeptic to, spoiler alert,
Believer.
basically a believer. Yeah. It all started with a friend of mine who was having, here in the States, we call them bachelorette parties or hen parties, what have you. And she wanted to do it in Montreal in Canada, and she wanted to go see a psychic. And so I was tasked with planning this weekend of festivities and finding a psychic, and I really wanted nothing to do with it. Was really just trying to be a good friend. And we found this woman, and the group of us went to see her. And the thing that struck me first and foremost was how specific the readings were that she gave each of us. I really went into it expecting, this is my first experience with a psychic, I was anticipating that she would, sort of give us very general predictions or whatever, that it was almost, like all four of us could have swapped, predictions after the fact, and they could have been equally applicable to all of us. But she was giving dates and seasons and eye color and profession and gender. And I mean, it really amazed me. And so that was kind of the first thing where I thought, wow, that's unusual. And then in the months that followed, so many of the things that she predicted for each of us started coming true exactly as she described them. And then I started talking about this experience with other people because I just couldn't really wrap my head around it. It didn't make any sense to me. It flew in the face of all of my skeptical beliefs. And this was the thing that was even more interesting to me, was the reaction and the responses from people when I would describe, this experience, that people were really engaged. They were super interested. They had their own experiences that they wanted to tell me about. And the other thing I noticed was they wanted to tell me these things, but they wanted to tell them to me in private because they were embarrassed that they had had a similar experience, or that they had a astrologer that they saw regularly, or that they, had some sort of desert experience with a shaman, whatever it was. They didn't want anyone to know about it. And what I realized was that all these people, we all had the same dirty little secret.
Yeah.
We were all in the same boat, and that people, even if they were skeptical, they wanted to believe. And so then I thought, okay, there's an audience, there's a discussion to be had here. And the only discussion that we've had prior has been either people who are sort of all in, I have this ability, here's my brand, I'm going to write a book and talk about it, or this is all, bogus and hogwash and nonsense, and I'm going to write a book about that. And I just thought, I think there's a place here for an exploration, that falls somewhere in between those two things. And so then I just dove into it and started interviewing shamans and astrologers and psychics and mediums. And I thought, if nothing else, this is going to introduce me to just a whole host of fascinating characters that'll be fun to write about, which was true. But then I got a whole lot more than that as well.
So when you embarked on the book, at that point, were you like, right, I know the book's going to be this? Or were you thinking, actually, it's going to be a bit of an expose of how these mystics are not up to much?
Right. Oh, I love that question, because what I originally conceived of for the book and what it ended up being were so completely different.
Yeah.
I really thought, I don't know how familiar you are with the science writer Mary Roach, but she is an American science journalist who's written a number of nonfiction books, researching different topics. She has one called Gulp that's all about the mouth and the body, and she has one about what happens to the body after it dies, but it's all from very much an investigative research perspective, and her work is really tremendous. I highly recommend her books. But I really thought that I was going to be writing a book in sort of the vein of Mary Roach. Well, it turns out, surprise, surprise, I am not Mary Roach. And when I set out to do that, so many of the people that I was interviewing, they would tell me these incredible stories about bringing people back from life, or, saving lives, or making these wild predictions that came true. And I would say, well, can I talk to that person that you helped or that you brought back from near death? Or can I talk to, the witnesses that you're describing? And these psychics and mediums and whatnot, they would all tell me, well, no, that's their, privacy. And, and I said, well, I want to offer my readers some semblance of proof, et cetera. And they kept telling me that's the wrong question, which of course is very convenient, right?
Yeah.
If you say, oh, proof doesn't matter, it's like, your red flag immediately goes up. But what I started to recognize in sort of a common theme among these interviews is how much these individuals, regardless of their cultural backgrounds or traditions, if they were working in the mystical realm, so much of their work revolved around these ideas of philosophy and poetry and religion. And I started to recognize patterns that a lot of the way they approached their work actually reminded me very much about what I knew about Christianity and Islam and Judaism and the philosophy courses I had taken in school. And what dawned on me was that I wasn't so much trying to write a book where I convinced people to believe something new or something quote unquote outlandish, but that I was telling them, hey, you actually already believe these things. You just call them by a different name, that this isn't actually outside the realm of what you grew up with or what you're accustomed to. And that was really kind of an interesting turning point for me of, trying to be this kind of hard edge investigative reporter. Aha, I got you, and say, oh, wait a minute. This is about purpose and meaning and living a richer, more authentic life, which is a different kind of truth.
Right. And actually, one of the interesting things about this podcast is it's about energy. So on one level, it's about, literally just having more vitality. But on a deeper level, it is about, the energies that surround us and are between us. And I think one of the things that comes up time and again is that there's just quite a lot of stuff that works for people, but you can't really explain how it works. And I certainly know that's been the case for me in terms of like things that have made me, and people that have made me feel amazing. But could I explain, or can I even tell you now why it works so well? I can't. Right. And so I wonder whether a kind of a theme or a kind of, I don't know how much of a message there is in the book, but is one perhaps to kind of look, sometimes trust your intuition on it, and you might not be able to explain it, but there are plenty of things to do with energy that human beings haven't worked out yet.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that you brought this back to energy, because, I think that word can be defined in so many different ways. There's physical energy, there's the energy that we get from the nutrients that we put into our body, the way we take care of ourselves, but also our spiritual energy. And that, I've had a real shift in focus of, and I hesitate to use the word spiritual because I think, and I talk about this in the book, it's a nebulous term and it can mean many different things to many different people. If I say I was raised Catholic, that tells someone something very specific about my upbringing. If you tell someone that you're spiritual, who knows what you mean?
Yeah. I totally agree. That. I always have a big problem with that word spiritual. And yes, my partner always says to me, you're spiritual. And I'm like, well, what does it mean?
Yes, we can define that in so many different ways. But I mean spiritual energy just in the sense of intuition or gut or our senses, or some sense of a higher self, or a notion of, I just had this feeling that I needed to do X or Y, whatever it is. And I think that was another shift for me in writing this book, was that idea of just looking at the world as all different types of energy, that everything is just an energy, and that I always at any moment have the choice to decide what type of energy I want to respond with, or, no matter what happens. And it's not a passive approach. You still, if there's a quote unquote problem that you're facing, you still have to deal with it. There are actions and steps you need to take, but how you take those actions, or what your frame of mind is, or that idea of just being more sensitive to my energy, has a direct impact on the other person that is in the room with me. And that was just incredibly powerful. And if you want to call that spiritual, whatever you want to call that, but I am much more conscious of energy in sort of all its forms, and how that shifting my energy, sort of emotionally or mentally, changes my energy physically. And, they're not disconnected.
And then, I mean, basically, you were a skeptic, and now you woo-woo, basically.
I know, and now I went totally woo-woo, and it's sort of with this idea of spirituality. One of the things I say in the book is, the phrase that I've really come to hone in on is, it's not so much that I'm religious or spiritual, but I consider myself in tune. And that's not something I wasn't in tune before. So I'm in tune with all the energies of the universe, which maybe is probably even more woo-woo than just saying I'm spiritual. I've really gone off the deep end.
I think we should call this podcast, Skeptic or woo-woo, what's the best approach? And then when they come up with in tune, hey man, I'm just so in tune. And so what I mean, it's really fascinating this. What was kind of one really extreme example when you went and saw someone who was pretty far out, who the skeptics amongst us, and I must admit I'm already skeptical of what you're about to say, might think, oh god, a tarot carder, or like some kind of faith healer, and actually it turned out to be incredible.
Yeah, there is a gentleman who's based in Bali. I've never met him in person, but his name is Hunter Reynolds. And as part of the research for this book, I took a awakenings course with him, which is, and it's 12 weeks. And each week is devoted to one of the 12 sun signs.
Sorry, so that is one of the different. Okay, right. So one of the 12 star signs.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And you have a weekly call with him that's about an hour, and it's one-on-one. But then throughout the course of the week, he emails you daily assignments and packets of reading. And I, of all the things that I was sort of most skeptical of when I started this project, astrology was probably at the top of the list, primarily because it was the thing that I had had the most exposure to, at least in my mind. And that was through, sort of the daily horoscopes or monthly horoscopes that you see in newspapers, magazines, online. And, it had always seemed kind of silly to me. And I had never had my natal chart read, or, I'd never gone to see an astrologer, but astrology was the thing that seemed to be most prevalent in kind of pop culture and easily accessible. And so consequently, I had developed a very negative idea of it. And Hunter's whole idea, and I absolutely encourage people to look up Hunter Reynolds and his astrology website and awakenings course. But his whole idea is that all 12 of the sun signs are in all of us, which again, this is how convenient. We're all going to have, some Pisces or some Capricorn, regardless of, whether we were born in, July or September. And it's this notion of, again, coming back to that sense of energy and really getting to know the nuances of each of the signs and how people show up in the world. And whether you believe in astrology or not, his course really looks at different personalities, different scenarios that we can all relate to, and really has a lot of practical advice about shifting the way that you interact with people and your relationships. And I would say that was something, I went into that course, into working with Hunter, very, very skeptical. And
I'm still struggling with it,
really
but I'm trying to be open-minded.
I'm going to give you an example of one of the assignments
Yeah.
To sort of help clarify. But I came out of it feeling as though I had just added to my, metaphorical toolkit of, it's like, why, if there's someone who might be able to give me a piece of advice or help that somewhere down the line is going to make a situation or a relationship easier, why wouldn't I want to have that in my toolkit?
Right.
Like, I'll take it. And one of the examples that I really love of an assignment that Hunter gave in one of the weeks was the idea of being a surprise to yourself, breaking down the momentum of who you think you are, which I just love, that idea of, we're sort of on autopilot with our identity. And so it's, breaking out of routines, doing something unexpected. And if you're having trouble with this idea, if you want to do it for a day or a week or whatever, to reach out to the people closest to you in your lives and ask them, in what ways would you invite me to act less predictably? And I like the fact that the question is phrased as an invitation. And of course, you might have someone in your life who says, actually, I would really like you to behave more predictably.
Yeah.
But hopefully there are other ways that they might say, it would be really cool if you, broke out of this behavior that I've come to predict from you, or whatever it is. And so those are some of the exercises that Hunter delves into.
That's nice. So who did you ask?
I asked several people. I asked my boyfriend at the time, and I asked my mom, and I asked a colleague, someone I had worked with professionally, and then a couple of good friends. So I tried to kind of, space people who knew me in different ways.
And what did they say?
Well, they all had different answers. I will not give you the answer of my boyfriend, but he's now my ex-boyfriend.
Dear.
Right.
Because of his answer.
Yes, exactly. But one of my friends said, I feel like I can predict the ways in which you're going to be anxious or stressed out when we are running late. And I would invite you to have a different reaction to, not being punctual. And I really liked that, because it's a really good point, right? Let's say you miss the bus. Okay, you've missed the bus. You're now going to have to wait for the next bus, or walk, or take a car.
Yeah.
That's your scenario. Like that, you're going to have to do that no matter what. You can either do that, or I can either do that really stressed out and annoyed and, kind of anxious and all up in arms about it. Or I can go through that process of it just like, well, this is the information. It's neither good nor bad. I'm going to do this from a place of just calm and peacefulness. And you're still doing the exact same actions, but doesn't that just seem like a much more pleasant way to move through the experience?
It does.
And if I had, and if I had to take an astrology course to figure that out, you know what? So be it.
And listen, don't think I haven't. I mean, I'm absolutely intrigued by what your boyfriend at the time said to you. But if you really don't want to say what he said, then we'll move on to the next question.
We will leave that. If there's ever an opportunity for me to come back on your podcast,
next time. That's a good tease.
I will answer it then. Okay. Exactly. Yes.
But listen, I'm going to sound like a skeptic now. I'm still not quite sure the difference between astrology, as I understand it, and what seems like some kind of really good life lessons and advice from somebody.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm not really sure that there is a difference. I'll give you a quote that I read in my research that did end up in the book from the wonderful writer, Philip Pullman. And he said that he doesn't believe, and I'm paraphrasing, he said it much more eloquently, but he doesn't believe in God, but he does believe in magic. And when I first read that, I thought, oh, that's really cool. That's interesting. now, having finished the book and come out the other side, if I was ever so lucky to be able to, sit down with Pullman, I would ask him, what's the difference between the two? Does it matter if we call it God or magic? And I think to answer your question, it's like, well, this just sounds like good advice, or this is just, I think I read that in a, kind of Buddhism for dummies once,
Yeah.
How is this connected to astrology? And, and I would say that I think that's one of the things that I learned about this project, which was we are all trying to answer those same questions of, flow and moving through the world in a, peaceful, sort of energetically strong way where we have a positive impact on the people around us and on ourselves, and, looking for meaning and purpose and all that jazz. And if you find it through, your religion, if you find it through poetry, if you find it through philosophy, Greek philosophers, if you find it through, a book that Malcolm Gladwell wrote, I don't think it matters, and I think for some people that way is astrology. There's a guy named Rob Bresney who runs a really terrific astrology site called Free Will Astrology, which is just, a great name. And so much of his horoscopes, he does weekly horoscopes and monthly horoscopes as well. But so much of his monthly horoscopes, he's quoting philosophers and he's quoting, monks and nuns. And so I think, certainly in America, I feel like there is this instinct to want to put things in these neat little boxes and say, well, this is from the Old Testament and this is something that we know from Homer. And, and I guess I'm just much less interested in those distinctions or saying one is better because it comes from this tradition. And I think astrology can just be one more way of exploring, what it means to be human.
And, I must admit, I'm still feeling quite skeptical, but I know, for example, a lot of my listeners know my own experience. Part of the reason I started this podcast is I've got this virus in the jungle and I didn't really know what it was, and I had loads of time off work and I was just in bed and I didn't have any energy, and I went to see someone who specialized in fatigue, and he did that through EFT or tapping, which you might have heard of before.
Oh, I do know about tapping.
Yeah. And I wasn't really into the tapping bit, but I thought, well, he's an expert in fatigue, so I'll go and see him. And now, of course, I'm a massive convert, and I've recommended it to a lot of other people who've listened to this podcast and friends, and they've all found it very helpful as well. Can I explain how it works? Not really. I know it's something about energy meridians, but I think as much as anything, for me, it was specifically about the healing talent of the person involved. He's just a brilliant, he's got a God-given talent for healing. And whether that was channeled into EFT or something else, he's just very good at it. And I wonder if it's the same for, Tony Robbins, whether he did what he did or whether he was an astrologer. Right. He'd still be someone who could inspire a lot of people.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely true. It's an excellent point that it doesn't necessarily matter what your vehicle or your medium is for your message. That if you're a healer, there are many different ways that you can communicate that and help people.
Yeah. So we don't want to be skeptics. We don't want to be woo-woo, but we want to be in tune. Yeah. And
yes, exactly. That's the takeaway.
And now that you've finished the book, what's kind of your day-to-day schedule like? What kind of things do you draw on to help you throughout the day to kind of feel more energized or, more focused or more in tune?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I had heard of before working on this book, but had never really given the proper amount of attention to, was the book The Artist Way by Julia Cameron.
Oh, yeah. I've had a note to read that for ages. Is it good?
It is, and the subtitle is A Spiritual Path to Higher Creativity. And I think it was originally published in the early 80s, when I think spirituality was maybe not quite as loaded of a term as we've come to feel that it is now.
Yeah.
But I really, really enjoyed the book. And one of the things that you do in that book is you start doing something called morning pages, where every morning, one of the first things you do when you wake up is you write by hand 3 pages, sort of stream of conscious. And the deal is that you don't reread the pages ever, and that you don't show the pages to anyone ever. And it's not because rereading the pages or showing them to someone would be such a horrible thing to do. It's that when you know that no one, including yourself, is ever going to read this, there's a subtle shift in how you approach the writing. You lose a certain level of self-consciousness about it that's really important. And I have found, for keeping me in tune, so to speak, on a day-to-day basis, those pages have just been, I hesitate to say this, but I really mean it, and so I'm going to say it, life-changing. Because it just, all those things that we find ourselves ruminating on throughout the day. I mean, I'm an overthinker. I'm a perfectionist by nature, very type A. And you just, there's like that low level kind of rumbling of like, oh, wish I hadn't said that, or I wish I'd done this differently, or how come I haven't heard back from this person? And you find that all those things that are going, that background noise, you get into it on the page in the morning and you work through it and you figure out, what's the underlying emotion or fear that's, driving this kind of pain or dissatisfaction or discomfort. And because you work it out on the page in the morning, you leave it there. You leave it in your notebook, and then you're not doing that ruminating throughout the day. And so you've created this newfound space, this spaciousness to let something better in. And that probably, if I could give one piece of advice, try the pages. Even if you can't do 3 pages, start with 1 page, whatever it is. And it doesn't matter if you're a writer. In fact, there's a whole theory that if you're not a writer, the pages are even more effective. So don't let that, I would say to anyone, don't be intimidated if, writing has never been your thing.
So you write it down and you never look at it again, because, I mean, there's probably some solid gold in there, Victoria. It might be the subject of your next book.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I think, well, I would argue that, getting, it's the opposite of gold, and getting all that nonsense on the page and away and gone allows me to make room for the gold later in the day, which I can reread and, will hopefully lead to my next project.
Yeah. It sounds quite meditative as well. I mean, in some ways, so you're not using any screens, you're writing stuff down. It's a chance to kind of clear the brain ahead of the day ahead.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, I'm going to try that.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. Even if you don't read the book, just do the pages.
Well, on Zestology that I ask everyone for a book recommendation. Is that your book recommendation?
I mean, I would be very happy to say that it is, but I do have another one in mind.
Good.
So I might have, just to be greedy and as a writer, I'll give 2.
That's fair
and
enough.
This one's totally different. It's called Unapologetic, and it's written by Charlene Cuthers, and it just came out in August of last year. And the subtitle, it's Unapologetic: a Black, queer, and feminist mandate for radical movements. It's not very long. Charlene is based in Chicago, and she is a community organizer. And what I love about this book is that it's written by someone who has been on the ground, proactive with a lot of the social and political and cultural issues of our day. And her perspective and her life experience is so different from mine. And it just was really eye-opening to be able to, it's like less than 200 pages or fewer than 200 pages, and to just spend the time in her company and the way that she has moved through some really tough situations. And she just feels like the new generation of activism. And it was super, super inspiring to me. So I highly recommend that too.
That sounds good. And do you think that, obviously, we've spoken about energy quite a bit, and there's obviously a lot of anxiety in the world at the moment, particularly in America, about the current state of politics in America, and we watch from afar, obviously, and I wonder if, with the things that previously, people my age might be quite skeptical. But millennials, younger people, are much more open-minded to all sorts of stuff. They're like, yeah, whatever. The world is so uncertain anyway, and we can't get a job, we can't get a mortgage, we can't save any money anyway, so we might as well be open to more alternative stuff.
Yes. In fact, the first portion of the book, I started writing this book in 2016, and the beginning of the book actually, delved right into the political climate in the U.S. in 2016. And then as I continue writing into 2017, and I very much had a hypothesis that so many Americans, rightly or wrongly, if we should have seen this coming or not, were so just devastated and blindsided by the shift in the sort of political arena with the 2016 election, that it was like, well, everything we thought was working, everything we thought we could count on and was stable and secure, the ways in which we were raised and the sort of narratives of a life that our parents taught us has just been undermined in one fell swoop. So if that's not working, maybe my assumptions, maybe my skepticism about other things was also unfounded, and it's time to, try something new and try a different approach. And I do think that that's part of the reason that people are trying ayahuasca and visiting shamans and, doing all of these things. And the one other thing I will say that you reminded me, you used the word uncertainty, and that's absolutely true. It things feel so uncertain, not only in America, but, very much in Europe and internationally as well. And I have now left this book with the belief that uncertainty is just opportunity with bad marketing. That's my new motto for life. That, it's like we say, oh, I just have to sit with this uncertainty a little bit longer.
Yeah.
That's sort of a phrase that, at least in America, that we find ourselves saying. And you would never say, oh, I just have to sit with this opportunity for a little longer. So I'm here to rebrand uncertainty.
Yeah. And I think it's
all about possibility.
When we watch a lot of, when you watch a lot of TV news, that uncertainty becomes something that can be very anxiety provoking. But I've got to say, we're not the only generation to feel this uncertainty, even though we might think that we are. I know that kind of a lot of our presumptions about kind of the political arena, for example, have just been blown out of the water over the last few years. And obviously you had Trump getting elected and we had Brexit. But I'm reading a book set in the 16th century at the moment, and in the 1540s or whatever, they all thought the world was going to end, and certainly in the 1960s, people thought the world might end, didn't they? When there was the big Cuban Missile standoff. Yeah. So there's loads of different times in history, and then you look at all the influenzas that have swept the world. I mean, it's not just now. Not that I want to catastrophize too much, but
no, it's very comforting, that sense of, this is cyclical, and we, please tell me that we've, been here before. Although I do remember right after Trump was elected, calling my mom and just being very upset and talking to her about it and saying, well, like in the 60s with, like you said, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then, with Nixon, like, did it feel this bad? And she just immediately was like, no, it wasn't this bad, which was the opposite of what I wanted her to say.
Thanks,
so
Mom.
In that, I think she might have been mistaken, but I just remember in that moment being like, that was not the reassurance that I was calling you for.
Yeah, it'll be all right, darling. That's what you wanted from her, really, wasn't it? But
yeah, exactly. She was not giving it to me.
Oh dear. Well, look, that's a great book recommendation. And what about one tip then for living with more energy and vitality?
Yeah, I would say to really just check in with yourself. And I know this sounds odd, but I find that for so long I was just on autopilot of, someone invites me to do something. I'm I'm going to say yes, or, I told so-and-so that I would meet them here, so I guess that's what I have to do, later today. And, or I'm going to grab my phone and start scrolling through Instagram or whatever it is. And I've started kind of doing these little, just like a split second of like, is it really like, is that the best thing that I could do right now, is to pick up my phone and scroll through Instagram? Or, yeah, my friend and I talked about meeting for coffee, but, I'm actually feeling sort of really drained now. And maybe that's not like the best use of my time right now. And at first you feel, or I felt like, oh, I'm being super flaky and irresponsible. But I just started being really honest with people. If we made a plan, I would say, let's plan on that. But, if something changes or I'm feeling off that day, I'll let you know. But just kind of giving people a heads up that, things might shift. And it's really just kind of been that idea of right now in the second, where is the best use of my energy? And that's been, just kind of not assuming, well, okay, this is what's on my calendar, so I have to do this. And this is obviously within reason. We have responsibilities and obligations, that we need to take care of. But just that kind of check-in, or sort of, you're fine-tuning your channel, so to speak, if you want to be woo-woo about it.
Tuning in and being in tune. That's what it's all about.
Yes.
And I mean, actually, I read something the other day that said, or maybe heard something, and it was, when you say yes to something, it means you're saying no to something else, which is very true, isn't it? It's very, very easy to overload our schedules. I think especially kind of certainly living here in London, there's so many opportunities to fill every minute of your time. But if you do, it means you never wake up on a Saturday morning with nothing to do. You never have a chance to recharge, and you never have a night in just to watch the telly and do nothing.
Yeah, exactly. And by the same token, another idea that I really like that came out of this book was this idea of, when we're really trying to control things, or we've decided, this is the path, or this is the outcome that I want, so I've said yes to this, and that to make it happen, or, whatever, you may get your outcome. And so you think, oh, great, I got what I wanted. But your outcome was your imagination. And I've now sort of come to this idea of, why would I want to limit myself to my imagination? Like, maybe if I had loosened the grip and had been more open to changing plans, or having a quiet evening instead of filling every second, some other even grander, cooler thing than I ever would have imagined might have presented itself. But I was so white-knuckled grip on this one, narrow outcome, that I completely missed the opportunity for something even better. So now I'm just kind of like, I'm going to dream, but it's like this or better or bigger. I recognize the limits of my own imagination, and I just I can't wait to find out what I'm going to think next. I have no idea.
Well, look, congratulations on the book. It is out now. Where can people find Future Perfect?
Yeah, absolutely. You can get it. You can get it online. It's available on Amazon. It's probably the easiest way, but you can also get it, wherever books are sold in bookstores. And if your local independent bookstore doesn't have it, they can certainly order it for you.
Good, very good. And you write for loads of publications, don't you? I suppose now that you've finished the book, that's kind of keeping you busy, writing various online articles and for various magazines and stuff like that.
All that jazz. I never know what project or writing assignment I'm going to be doing next. I do a fair amount of ghostwriting, so I love it. I get to it's like it's a lifetime of term papers, which I know or university, research papers, which probably sounds awful to many people, but I think it's terrific because I just get to do a deep dive into, so many different topics and learn something new. There
you go. Hope you enjoyed that. Back strolling around Tanner Street Park now. on a windy afternoon. And remember, Victoria's book is Future Perfect, a skeptic's search for an honest mystic, available everywhere now. And just before you go, remember to head over to tonywrighton.com to sign up for the Zestology newsletter, which I send out every week. It's a collection of the best links, motivating books, gadgets, supplements, theories, articles that I've read, all sorts going on. Anything that I think might give you a little bit more energy throughout your week, energise you a little bit. There's often quite a bit of biohacking in there as well. Plenty of good stuff and good links, and you can head over to tonywrighton.com and you'll get that every week. Right, I'm off. Thanks for listening, and I will see you next week on Zestology.